So picture this. August 10th, 1999. An unarmed Pakistani naval aircraft is flying near the border with India. Suddenly, it's shot down. All 16 people on board are killed. This single event sends shockwaves from the tense borderlands of South Asia all the way to the grand halls of the world's highest court. But what happened there? Well, it's not what anyone expected.
Right away, Pakistan takes the case to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. Their claim was pretty blunt. This was the destruction of a Pakistani aircraft, a major violation of international law. India's story? Totally different. They called it an aerial incident in Indian airspace. The lines were drawn, and the stage was set for a massive legal battle.
But here's the twist. That legal battle? It never happened. In what was a pretty stunning decision, the court voted, get this, 14-2, that it didn't even have the power, the jurisdiction, to hear the case. Just like that, the doors to the World Court were slammed shut before anyone could even start arguing about who was right or wrong.
And that brings us to the big question of this whole explainer. Why? Why on earth would the world's most powerful court turn away a case about an armed conflict between two nuclear-armed states? The answer, it turns out, gets to the very heart of how international law really works, or sometimes doesn't.
Okay, so first, let's look at what Pakistan was trying to do. See, in international court, before you can argue the facts of your case, who shot what, where it happened, you have to win a totally separate fight. You have to prove the court even has the right to listen to you in the first place. This is the battle for jurisdiction.
And this is a huge deal, because international law is not like your local court. You can't just sue another country whenever you want. The ICJ only has power if both countries involved have consented to be judged by it. It's basically a voluntary system, which is a wild concept when you think about it. So, to prove India had given its consent, Pakistan's lawyers came in with a three-pronged attack. First, they pointed to a really old treaty from 1928. Second, they used something called the optional clause, where both countries had basically said, yes, we accept the court's jurisdiction, but with some fine print. And third, they argued the UN Charter itself means countries have to go to the court.
But India had an ace up its sleeve, a legal wall they had built years and years ago. It was called the Commonwealth Reservation.
And this, right here, is the heart of India's defense. When India agreed to the court's jurisdiction, it added some specific exceptions or reservations, and one of them was crystal clear. The court has no power in disputes with any country that is or ever was part of the Commonwealth. Since Pakistan is in the Commonwealth, India's argument was simple. Sorry, this rule applies. Case closed.
Now, of course, Pakistan fought this tooth and nail. They said, come on, that reservation is totally obsolete. It's a relic from another era. They also claimed it was discriminatory, basically designed with the specific goal of blocking cases from them. And finally, they argued it was what they called extra-statutory, meaning it was a type of exception the court's own rules shouldn't even allow.
So, you have Pakistan's three big arguments for why the court should hear the case, and India's one big legal wall saying, no way. How did the judges untangle this mess? Let's break down how they actually decided. Well, the court went through Pakistan's arguments one by one and just knocked them all down. That old 1928 act, the court said, nope, India made it clear ages ago it wasn't a part of that anymore. The UN Charter, the court found that, no, the Charter doesn't force countries to use the ICJ. And the main event, the optional clause, the judges ruled that India's Commonwealth reservation was totally valid and applied perfectly to this case.
And the whole decision really boiled down to this one idea. The court said its job isn't to second-guess why India made that reservation or whether the original reasons for it were still relevant. All that mattered was the clear intention of India to limit its consent. India had put a clear limit on the table, and the court felt it had no choice but to respect it.
But hey, remember that 14-2 vote? That means two judges on that panel passionately disagreed with the majority, and their dissenting opinions give us this fascinating glimpse into how this whole thing could have gone the other way.
And what you see here is this fundamental clash of legal philosophies. The majority said a state's intention is everything. The dissenters, they said not so fast. They believed a country's power to make reservations isn't unlimited. In their view, the court can and should throw out a reservation if it's just completely arbitrary or discriminatory.
I mean, listen to this quote from one of the dissenting judges. It is absolutely scathing. He argued that if you look at how India changed the wording of this rule over the years, you're led to an inescapable conclusion. It was specifically designed, he said, to block a case from one country and one country only, Pakistan. And to him, that made it totally invalid.
So the court case was over. But the judges knew that the real-world conflict, the actual tension between India and Pakistan, was very much alive. So in their final judgment, they added something really important. A reminder that their legal ruling wasn't the end of the story.
The judges were super clear about this. They basically said, look, just because we can't hear this case doesn't give you a free pass to ignore the problem. They went out of their way to affirm that both India and Pakistan still had a fundamental legal duty to settle their differences peacefully.
And they weren't just being vague about it. The court actually pointed to specific agreements both countries had already signed. They brought up the UN Charter, the Simla Accord from 1972, and the Lahore Declaration, which was signed just months before this incident. They were essentially saying, you've already promised each other you'd find a peaceful way.
This final instruction is so powerful. It's the court admitting that its own power is limited. It's tied by the consent of nations. But it's also a firm reminder that the broader, universal obligation to pursue peace, well, that's constant. It's inescapable. So in the end, this case leaves us with a huge and maybe uncomfortable question about how global justice works. Is the power of international law really based on what's right and wrong, or is it ultimately just limited by what powerful countries are willing to agree to? That's a tension that's at the very core of our world order, and there's definitely no easy answer.